Okay, so just quickly to start off the debate, I'm going to define valid as having a sound basis in logic or fact, reasonable or cogent. And just to establish the burdens of the round, as pro, I will win if I successfully refute all of my opponent's arguments, and con will win if he proposes at least one argument that I fail to refute. So with that, I'll pass it to him.
All right. So, when the question is of God's existence, specifically, I'm mentioning Hindu gods because I'm not thorough that much with the Bible. So, when we go through the Hindu scriptures, go through the scriptures of Hinduism, the Vedas, the Puranas, the two epics, the Ramayanas and the Mahabharatas, we find quite a lot names and of cities and names of characters, cities, places, and conditions. And so proofs, I would use those names, cities, and characters and conditions in this debate. So when we see the Ramayana, we see that Lord Rama is the hero of the epic Ramayana, and his wife, is being taken away by Ravana, who is a devil. So when we see that, we find that the place where Lord Rama actually went, where his wife was actually stolen by the demon king Ravana, that place is today existing with the same name. Secondly, the place where Ravana took Sita, that was Lanka, is today. It is said that today it is still existing as Sri Lanka. Thirdly, Ravan's palace still exists in Lanka, and people say that there's a huge, massive rock, and people say that that was sculpted. And today, too, we find paintings in that huge, massive rocks, which say that, and historians have actually tested those paintings, which actually say that those were of the too early period, that those were of a period before Aryans invaded India. It means, and presently it is said that Aryan invasion was the first instance of development of human beings, where we started developing. So the first instance we see is that the historians say that the paintings found in Lanka are of a pre-Aryan invasion period. So what does this mean? This means that before people came in India, the Aryans invaded in India, something had already happened in India, something had already developed in India. It means that those paintings are of a period when no Aryan came to India. So it is a clearly evident that God actually existed, the demon king actually existed. Moreover, thirdly, there are several places in Lanka where it is said Lord Hanumana, the monkey god whom we say he stepped, and there's a huge, massive footprint of a huge, massive footprint of a human being or an ape. It is not clearly evident as to yet, but it is also said to be of a pre-Aryan invasion period. And
I'm going to pass it back because I'm assuming you're in the middle of an argument. So I'll let you finish.
Okay, since this demon king stayed in Lanka, now Lord Ram had to go from India to Sri Lanka, which is the present day Sri Lanka, which was said to be the earlier. It is said that in Ramayana, Lord Rama constructed a bridge made up of stones from India to Sri Lanka, and that stone bridge still exists there. And that stone bridge exists, but it has anyways submerged. Secondly, when we come to the Mahabharata, we see that several cities that were the Kurukshetra, the Indraprastha, and many the Hastinapur city, they still exist with the same name. The names have not yet been changed. So what does this mean? This means that these cities actually existed. Moreover, when we go further to the eastern part of India, we find a city submerged in the oceans. And the Puranas describe it very properly as the city of Dwarka, which was owned by Lord Krishna. And it is said that in Puranas, that it will be submerged in the present era, that is the Kali Yuga. So it is clearly evident whatever was said in Puranas anytime it actually existed. So with that, I pass the mic.
Okay, so you're making the argument that because the scriptures match reality, everything that's said in them is accurate? Okay, so my issue with that is I don't think so I'm not very knowledgeable on the Hindu scriptures, so when were they supposedly written?
When did they supposedly? What?
When were the Hindu scriptures written? When were they written?
So as the archaeologists have studied the time period of the Hindu scriptures and the Vedas and the Puranas. The Vedas were written nearly 4,000 years ago. Then came the Puranas nearly 2,000 years ago, and then the Vedanta came before the Vedas, and many scriptures came. So it is said, actually, in the Vedas, it is referred that the Vedas and the Puranas they do not have a time to start and they do not have a time to end. That is, they were never written, they were inherited. And the Puranas especially, they were never written, they were inherited. And moreover, it is said that Hinduism, actually this religion, and God especially, they never had a start and they never will have an end. So this was the concept given in the Vedas and the Puranas, while the historians argue that the Vedas were written nearly 4,000 years ago to 5,000 years ago, and the Puranas were written nearly 2,000 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, so this is that I don't think we can trust the scriptures, obviously. So the issue with this is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if you're going to make a claim, for example, that there were paintings of before people actually came to India, there's not really a way to verify that those paintings actually were there prior to people arriving in India. They could have been there. Someone could have put them there on purpose in order to verify their religion, or someone could have left it there and then it was found later. So when you're making these claims, you have to present a lot of evidence in order to verify that. And the reason for that is that every single religion has some kind of supposed historical evidence for it. For example, if I were arguing for Christianity, I could say that the apostles all claim to have seen Jesus resurrected, and they were tortured and killed because they believed that Jesus was resurrected and they refused to back down on that belief. And the issue with that is not that the apostles weren't tortured and killed, it's that they didn't actually see Jesus be resurrected. So you say the stone was there, but just because the stone was there doesn't mean it was there because of supernatural causes. So if you're going to make such a claim, A, you have to explain why the apostle situation is different from the situation you're presenting, and B, you have to present evidence that would be able to prove it. Because it's an extraordinary claim, it requires more evidence than other claims would.
All right. So what my claims are that anyone, as you said, that anyone could put the paintings over there purposely to defend their religion. What I think is that the archaeologists have actually, by carbon dating, there's a technology called carbon dating. The archaeologists have actually tried to have the carbon dating of the paintings and some cave paintings found there. But actually, those cave paintings came out to be, by the carbon dating, according to the carbon dating, those scriptures and paintings came out to be of the prehistoric, like before the Aryans invaded to India. So that was the basis of my saying that the paintings have been found to be of a pre-Aryan invasion era. And moreover, when we look into the scriptures, my just one question is that why on the places mentioned in the scriptures and the Puranas and the Vedas, why on that specific places are the all evidences found? whether it's the city of Dwarka, it is found in the exact place mentioned in the Puranas and Puranas. Why the city of the city of Hastinapur is found on the exact place mentioned in the Puranas. Why the city of say Kurukshetra, why the battleground of Kurukshetra is found on the exact plane mentioned in the Vedas. Just my question is that when it is found on the exact thing, what is mentioned in the Puranas and the Vedas, it is evident that the Puranas and Vedas would be true, because they are saying a thing which exists. It means that something mentioned in them is true. So therefore, I conclude that everything mentioned in Puranas and the Vedas are true. Everything, every incident given in the Mahabharata and Ramayana were true, because evidence is there. I have evidences. Why the palace of Ravana is found on the exact place with the exact surroundings of a jungle as mentioned in the Vedas. Now, anyone cannot grow a jungle around the palace, can we? So that's my question.
Okay. So you mentioned that the scriptures were never written, they were inherited. So these things you're talking about, for example, the painting being there, I'll start with that. So you say that carbon dating shows that it was a certain age. So let's accept that it was however old you said it was. I don't exactly remember the age, but let's say it was that age. We still don't know how exactly it got there. So you can say that it was because of whatever the scripture says the cause was, but I can say that it was because someone put it there. The scriptures could have been written in a process where people write the scriptures as they see evidence come to them. So for example, someone's walking through the forest, they see the painting there, and they write a story in order to correspond with that. So there's you say that there were no people before the, I think you called it the pre-ardent invasion. So if you can present any evidence that there actually weren't any humans present in those places before that time, then we can discuss that. But I think without any evidence that there couldn't have been people there before, in order to put the evidence where it ended up being, even if it's that old, someone could have put it there. Someone comes along later and they misinterpret it in a different way. They write the scripture according to that so that it matches up with some supernatural story. So even though it appears that it matches up with something written 4,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, the scriptures could have been written to match the evidence. There's no reason to suggest that the evidence matches the scriptures, because there's no reason to suggest that scriptures were written first. So if you can't provide any evidence that the scriptures were indeed as old as you claim they are, then we don't have any proof that the evidence came after the scriptures. And the problem with that is that your argument that the scriptures are true rests upon the premise that the evidence came after, because the scriptures must have had predictive power in order to be accurate in this way. So until you can establish that these scriptures were indeed predictive, that the scripture came first and then the evidence that humans weren't there on India, for example, we can't trust the claim that these scriptures were the original source of information and the evidence came after, following the prediction of the scripture.
All right. So the city of Dwarka, which I was telling you, which was submerged, which was found recently submerged under the ocean in the exact place where the Puranas mention it, there ancient human presence have been found, but those humans actually existed on the land. So how come the Puranas can predict that one place which was inhabited by the humans can be submerged under the land? There have been evidence of human existence there. Now, human cannot go and exist in water, go inside water and stay there. So my question is, how can Puranas say that a city will be submerged? It means that they are true. They actually said that there is a city of Dwarka which was ruled by the King Krishna, who was the Lord who came who incarnated as Krishna, Lord Vishnu. So how can the Puranas predict that a city which is fully inhabited by humans can be submerged into the ocean? It means that they have a proper truth in them. That's why they're projecting them. And moreover, when we find the cities of Hastinapur, the cities of Indraprastham, and many other cities, the Ram Setu, the between India and Sri Lanka, the rock where Ravana built his palace, we find that, and as I actually said, they were the paintings were before the Aryan invasion in India. What does this mean? And they're beautiful paintings of Aryan before Aryan invasion. So what does this mean? That before Aryan's invasion to India, there have been some humans existing in India. Now, this means that when humans existed in India, what does this actually say? That God came to God incarnated. God before Aryans invaded India, someone existed, and that existence can be God, because the Puranas say that there are many time periods. There are 4 yugas. There are 4 time periods, and this is the Kali Yuga, the last yuga going on. So the Puranas say this, that before the human invasion in Kali Yuga, earlier than that, also human existed. So what does this mean? Again, the Puranas are being true, that true to their word, that humans existed in all time periods and they will always be destroyed. Because when Aryans invaded India, they were Aryans alone. That's why they easily captured India. So that's my argument. And moreover, the city of Dwarka, which I was talking of, how can the Puranas predict that one city which is densely inhabited by human beings can be submerged under ocean?
Well, one possibility, this isn't going to be my argument. One possibility could be that they made like they're genius scientists and they predicted it, but I'm not going to go for that. That's probably pretty unlikely. So what I'm going to say instead is, I don't think that the scripture was written and then the city was submerged. I don't think it happened in that order. I think that the stories that say that the city was submerged were written after the city was submerged. So maybe the scripture was a work in progress, or maybe it was written right after the city was submerged. But the part that says that the city sunk under was written after the city actually sunk under. It was a recounting of events that already occurred, not a prediction of what would occur in the future. So that's my response to that. You said that the Qur'an predicted, tell me if I'm getting this right, because I'm not sure I did, but you said the Qur'an predicted that whoever did an ardent invasion would take over India. And that was a correct prediction? No? Okay. I'll pass it to you so you can explain.
No, I never said that Puranas predicted the Aryan invasion in India. I said that the Puranas defined 4 periods of time, that is the Krita Yuga, the Dwapar Yuga, the Kali Yuga, and one more period was there. So the 4 periods of time where human existence was evident, and those 4 periods were actually dissolved after a certain time period, and then there was no human existence at a certain time period, and then again there was development. So this cycle of development and recreation went on, and humans came in Krita Yuga, and they again died, and they again came in the second Yuga, they again died and developed, and again came in the Dwapar Yuga, and then again died and developed, and have again came into the Kali Yuga. So what does this mean? That pre-Aryan invasion in India, before the Aryan invasion, there were certain humans, and that's actually predicted by the Puranas, that every era there are humans, and this was the starting of Kali Yuga, when actually we say that the Aryans invaded in India. This was the starting of Kali Yuga, and this means that Puranas have already suggested that humans actually existed, and that is evident. The archaeologists have found paintings which came before the Aryan existence in India, which dates before the Aryan in India. Furthermore, I have certain videos proving that God actually exists, but I cannot just show them on the screen because I do not see a probability, like any chance of showing them on QallOut. So what my argument is, that when the Puranas have said that this would happen, and this happens at the exact place. And there's a vivid description of the present time which is going on in the Puranas. It is, and the Puranas were written long ago. It is written that at this time on the earth there would be lots of sins, there would be lots of there would be lots of cheating, and there would be lots of sin, and gradually the sins will increase, and that's what's happening. There are sins going on throughout the world. There are cheatings going on throughout the world. There are terrorists going about killing the people, and that's what the Puranas said, that what would happen in Kali Yuga, and that's actually happening. So what does this say actually? That Puranas were true, and they are true. They are proving to be true. In the Puranas, it is clearly written that in Kali Yuga there would be cheating all around, there would be murders all around, and there we are. There are murders all around, there are sins all around. And throughout the human history, this time period, earlier the people invaded India, earlier there were only kingdoms throughout the world, there were empires throughout the world, but this mass scale sin.
Okay, so the way I'm going to respond to this is through something called a Barnum statement. So a Barnum statement is an example of a psychological effect where someone proposes a question to you or a statement to you that's very vague and could apply to many things. So the person who receives it will interpret it in whatever way they see fit. For example, if I say, you will have trouble in a relationship in the future, that could mean a million different things. And as such, you can interpret it in the way you want, and somehow I become correct because I say something that matches up with you, even though this would apply to the majority of people. So I think when you say the Qur'an predicted that there would be sins and cheatings, if it doesn't specify exactly what that is, that could be practically anything. So if you say that and then it comes true, it's like, well, of course there are going to be sins and cheatings. But when you don't really specify what that means, there's no way to verify it. How do we determine whether it's increasing or decreasing? How do we determine that? It doesn't say like there's going to be a higher murder rate or anything like that. It says there's going to be sins. We don't know what that means, so we can't measure it accurately. And if you say sins and cheatings are going to increase, there's a high likelihood that you can find a way for that to be true, regardless of what actually turns out happening. So there's maybe say like a 70% chance that if you say sins and cheatings are going to be increasing, then you'll be right. So that means that when you say the scriptures made this prediction and they're right, well, of course it's right, because that's the most likely outcome. There's no predictive power because that's the most likely outcome in the first place. So that prediction has no meaning. The same thing applies to when you say there's a cycle of death and rebirth. It's like, okay, if someone invades and they take over, that's a death and a rebirth. But it doesn't say exactly what's going to happen. So you're assigning meaning to something that didn't originally have meaning. You're saying, oh, look, this happened, and I'm going to take my scripture over here and I'm going to match them up and say, therefore the scripture predicted this, when in reality, it could apply to many different things. So you can't say that the scripture predicted it, because there were many different possibilities for something to happen. And it means there was a high likelihood that what the prediction the scripture made was correct. The scripture didn't have any supernatural power because anyone could have made a prediction like that and it could have been correct. If I say there will be a major conflict in the future, it's like, obviously there's going to be a major conflict in the future. So there has to be some very specific thing. And like I already responded to the city sinking under the water, so that's a separate argument. I'm only talking about when you say things like there will be an increase in sins or there's a cycle of death and rebirth. I don't think those are founded because they don't match up.
All right. What my argument to this is that the Puranas were written at a very early time, that was nearly 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. At that time, there were absolutely peace throughout the world, according to what archaeologists have said. According to that time in India, that was the early Maurya period of existence. And at that time, there were least sins. And it is as described by the early historians, the people just kept their doors open and no thieves would invade. And this is the fact by the historians. And what my perception is that These Puranas were written nearly 4,000 years ago. And at that time, we all know that the present age and the age when the Puranas were written, that is 3,000 and 4,000, 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, that was actually had a huge difference, a huge gap between them. And the Puranas have yet described what was geometry, what was mathematics, and it has evidence many scientific things, and they were actually put to use. Actually, Albert Einstein said, the great scientist said, that all my derivations are because I read the Puranas, I've read the Bhagavad Gita. All my relations, all my scientific inventions are because of that. So that was a personal statement of Albert Einstein. So but my argument is that when the Puranas were written, it was 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, and there was a huge gap between this time period and that time period, and the status of people, the mentality of people, the way of living of the people have a huge difference. You see how people lived 3,000, 2,000 years ago. They had no clothes to wear. They just covered their body with leaves. So there were no sins, and there were no disaster, man-made disasters, like someone dropping a bomb, or someone just rapidly shooting a gun, or someone killing unnecessarily. There were no evidences. So how come does the Puranas so confidently say that this should happen and this will happen in the Kali Yuga? It means that the Puranas were written with a sense of future prediction, and this means that the Puranas were absolutely true, because when they are predicting a thing which was not even thought of in that early period, they had actually referred that there would be weapons, there would be a fight for money. Actually, that time we do not find a fight for money. There would be weapons of mass destruction. That time we didn't find any weapon of mass destruction. So how?
Okay, so again, I'm going to make the same argument in this speech as I did in the last speech. So when a lot of the statements, I understand what you're saying with back then it was different. So they didn't have any understanding of what a weapon of mass destruction could be. They wouldn't be able to predict that. But I think the issue with that is, once again, that it's too ambiguous, that it can be applied to too many things. So if someone says a weapon of mass destruction, well, what counts as a weapon of mass destruction? Is a nuclear bomb a weapon of mass destruction? Is an assault rifle a weapon of mass destruction? We don't know what will be defined as a weapon of mass destruction. So as soon as some new invention is created that could kill a lot of people, you say, oh, that was the weapon of mass destruction. That was what the Qur'an predicted. But it could be anything. So they didn't make a specific enough prediction for us to be able to verify it and say they predicted this and this occurred, because there are too many things you could assign to that. The same thing happens to conflict will increase. Conflict will increase and decrease over time. There's World War II, and now there's not World War II. So there was conflict, and then there wasn't conflict. But what conflict was the Quran predicting? It could be predicting practically anything if it says something like, there will be sins in the future, there will be cheating in the future. Is capitalism cheating? We don't know. It depends on how you interpret it and how you try to match the reality to the Quran's predictions, because they're so vague. So I think the only arguments that you can reliably make are the ones that make very specific predictions, such as what you said about the city sinking underwater. So again, that's a separate argument. But anytime you say something like sins increased, that's just not a valid argument, because you haven't provided any reason for us to see that the Quran would have been predicting a specific thing. Yes, it was more peaceful back then, but anyone with any common sense would be able to understand that at some point it would become less peaceful. So those are things that we can predict reliably, and therefore the Quran didn't have some kind of supernatural power in order to predict those things. Going back to the city, like I said before, that the part about the city could have been written retroactively. It was an account of events, not a prediction of events. And there's no reason for us to believe that that part was actually written before the city sunk in the first place. and therefore that's not a valid argument in support of God's existence, because there's no evidence that it's more likely than not that that was true.
All right. What my actual argument now is that when the Puranas and the Vedas were written, the Puranas are said to be written 2,000, 3,000 years ago, and the Vedas nearly 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, and that was a quite old period, and that was an unimaginable period for conditions of human development. And moreover, I would point out one thing which is striking my mind. During the Harappan period, the first civilization of India, in the areas of Nepal, there are evidence of Shivlingas, which are the symbols of worship of Lord Shiva. Number one. Number two, during the Harappan civilization, there were Pashupati seals which clearly depict Lord Shiva. Number two. Number three, we find incense sticks, the symbols of incense sticks, and certain ash near the sites of the Harappan civilization, which the historians say that probably people burnt incense sticks and ash and the ashes dropped from them. So what does this say? That actually, like after like when the Harappan started the civilization, actually then too the gods' worship was done. So when the worship was done from the starting of the Harappan civilization, can you imagine from where did the people get idea of the Shivlinga? And the perfect Shivlinga shape is found in Nepal and some other areas of India, which clearly dates back to the early Harappan period. Where do the people get this ideology of God? It means that before the Harappan period started, the ideology of God actually existed. So what does this clearly say? That before the civilization started, God actually existed. Then after that, the people started worshipping him. Earlier, the worship was not earlier the worship was in practice as soon as the people started civilization in India. What does this mean? That after the civilization, God in the early part of the civilization, God was worshipped. So God actually exists, because when the human civilization starts, they start by worshipping God. And it is the first civilization of India, the Harappan civilization. It means that the first civilization worshipped God, and therefore God existed. Yeah, I'll pass the mic.
Okay, so I'm gonna make a similar comparison that I did to the apostles earlier in this debate. And the reason you say that people worshipped God and therefore God must have existed, because where else would they get this idea from? And I would say, where did all the other religions get their ideas from? If there are thousands of religions that exist in the world, they can't all be right. The Christianity and Hinduism can't simultaneously be right. So where did they get their idea from? And the answer is, the vast majority of religions must have gotten their ideas from other people, because they're wrong. They weren't describing God, they were describing other people. So you say, my religion is correct, but why is your religion right? Why is it because your people worship God, that makes your God correct? But if Native Americans worship the gods of the trees, why doesn't that make their religion correct? And the reason is because none of those arguments are valid. If all of these different religions were verified by your argument, then there would be thousands of different religions that were all simultaneously correct, which is impossible. So we can't say people were worshiping God, therefore God must have existed, because you haven't provided any evidence to show us that they were worshiping God because they directly observed him. The fact that so many religions exist shows us that people have a natural tendency to create spiritual figures, to create gods. So the reason they were worshiping them is the same reason Native Americans worship their gods, the same reason that Christians worship their gods. It's because they think that they know God exists, but they don't actually. So that's not a real argument in support of your position. See. So, yeah. So the last thing I'll say is, again, you brought up the fact that they were written 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, or even before that. But I don't think that invalidates the statement that I made that you haven't yet addressed, talking about the Barnum statement idea, that if you make a vague claim, eventually it will be verified by something. So until that's challenged, what we can see is when the Quran makes predictions like there will be an increase in sins and cheatings, that's not a prediction that we can trust and say, okay, this prediction was right, therefore God exists. Because anyone can make that prediction. No one needs supernatural powers to make that kind of prediction and then have people later match up reality to the predictions, say this is what they meant, when in reality, the book never specified what it meant. It just waited for other people to verify it in the way that they saw fit, in the way that verified their religion. So that's not a valid argument in support of God.
Yeah. So what the Puranas say, that there would be this Kali Yuga era where the sins would increase, where the weapons of mass destruction would be there. But there is of like actual prediction of what weapons of mass.
Sorry about that. So unfortunately, because you got cut off, I can't really respond to your argument. But I guess the validity of your argument would depend on exactly how specific the weapons of mass destruction were. So I'm not knowledgeable on Hinduism. I don't know what kind of predictions they made. I'm guessing they didn't say, eventually we're going to learn how to split an atom in half and then they're going to nuke Hiroshima. But the specificity of that claim will correlate to how closely it follows the rebuttal I already made about vague claims. So again, if you say that there's going to be weapons of mass destruction, I can say we haven't defined what that means. So I guess you can comment after the debate what exactly the scriptures said weapons of mass destruction would be. But if they said it would be able to kill hundreds of people, it's like, okay, that's probably going to happen at some point. So you can't just assign meaning to a specific weapon and say this is what they meant when they said weapon of mass destruction. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say. So thanks for the debate. I'm okay with giving up my last 2 minutes since I made you re-explain your argument because I was too dumb to understand it. So we're good there. Thanks for the debate. Hope we can do the same thing in the future.